So we're live.
Oh, I gotta go to
Periscope.
Oh, that's. Should have already done this.
To where the broadcast, or no, it's where you go and find those numbers for the. It's something about. Pause it there. Hello, guys.
Hey there.
We're finally here.
For another Ides.
2 weeks late.
Sorry about that. Don't know if we'll be able to get them on time for a little while your schedule gets changed. But we're here to make the Ides great again. And I think we've got a good one for you today on Edgar Allan Poe, who was, how did you title it? The Deplatforming.
The Deplatforming of Edgar Allan
Poe.
One of the first people, or one of the early victims of cancel culture.
All right.
And, we want to start out the broadcast. We got a lot of interesting stuff about him that we didn't know ourselves. And, again, me and Yvonne consider ourselves kind of, in the know on a lot of things. But the more we dig, we find out the more we don't know.
The less we know.
And I think Crow says it best on his radio station, belief is the enemy of knowing.
Right.
And so we believe things, and there's a reason why a lot of the stuff we believe is because we've been told since we were born, things that happened before we were born, and we only have what people tell us, and
right.
We don't kind of dig for ourselves. So what we wanted to think about was, what is your mental picture of Edgar Allan Poe? We say Edgar Allan Poe. You saw the name of this scope today. What is your usual picture of?
Yeah, I'm curious. I would, if any of you guys would put in the comments what your, what comes up in your memory, because when Lou first mentioned this Eureka, which is a book by Edgar Allan Poe that I had not heard of, and I thought I knew everything that Edgar Allan Poe had done. And so we kind of had a Eureka moment of our own, like wondering what is this book and why didn't we know about it?
And so I'm guessing when you think of Edgar Allan Poe, you have a mental picture of a drunk, a melancholy person, obsessed with darkness and and the macabre, and he was the father of the, kind of like the father of the horror stories and stuff like that. So,
right.
And that's always the picture that I've had of him. And we dug into this,
depressing.
and there was a rewriting.
Vincent Price. Adam Townsend says Vincent Price, like that kind of.
Right. That's a good one. That's
kind of dark.
And so what we find is that we find a much more complex person who was trying to find God in his own way and believed in God and believed he was the creator of the universe. And he was at odds with a lot of people of his day. And, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was one of the people that he was at odds with.
Right.
But there were a lot of people that he inspired. He basically made up several genres of fiction. And so we're going to get into that. But Yvonne has some good insights from the book Eureka itself, which I warn you, I've been trying to read it myself, and it's a very, I've been saying thick.
Yeah, it's not a book that you just kick up your feet. You have to no sound around. You've got to really be focused. It's really above my pay grade. But it's funny because when you read scientific or, not a storytelling type book that's full of words that sometimes you have to look up, and I kept, even though I couldn't understand half of it, I kept wanting to read it. And it was just strange because usually I struggle to get through those and I'll read a little bit at a time. But it really wasn't hard. I wanted to read it, and I still could go back and read it probably 10 times because I really don't understand it. And I'm not going to tell you much from it because it's
and remember, this is a thing. It's called a prose poem by Edgar Allan Poe. He wrote it. He thought that this was his most important work.
Yeah.
And I've never heard of this before a few weeks ago when we started looking into this. And he wrote this toward the end of his life. And he was going to go into this more. He was going to expound on this topic more. And
when he died.
But when you read on the internet about this life of Edgar Allan Poe, all the different, you go to Wikipedia, you go to different Encyclopedia Britannica and other kind of major places, they either don't mention this work at all, or they say that they believe it was satire. And so they try to belittle this thing. But this thing is, to me, it's got profound stuff in it as far as just getting a new look at what Edgar Allan Poe was and what he thought about.
Right. I've even, I can't remember who it was that said that it was the rantings of a madman. Just everything was just negative. So I ordered the book and just began to read it, and was just, it's pretty amazing. Even if I don't buy into everything that he was saying, it's very interesting. And the title, so it was actually a lecture, and the title of the lecture was On the Cosmography of the Universe. But he called it Eureka because I think it was like a Eureka. I've found it. I understand the universe. He described it as the universe of spirit as well as the universe of mind. So as he's writing this book and he's describing the universe, and he's speaking of it scientifically, like the placement of the planets and how far they are away from the sun and all these different factual things. His goal is to wed the metaphysical with the mathematical. That's how he describes it. And
he's doing this as a human being who has his own discernment. He's using his own mind and looking and observing what he sees. And he's in this thing, he basically calls out the scientism people, the scientists, and says, you don't know everything. You can't prove everything that you're saying.
Right. And a lot of these scientists, he calls out Newton.
He calls out Isaac Newton.
There's some others that he calls out, and that probably didn't go down well with a lot of conventional thinkers of that time.
The experts of his day did not like this.
So he designs to discuss in Eureka the physical, metaphysical, and mathematical of the material and spiritual universe, of its essence, its origin, its creation, its present condition, and its destiny. So just to give you a taste of what's in, I'm just going to give you a few lines. I'm not going to go in deep into it because it's really deep. But here's a revelation that he says, a perfect consistency can be nothing but an absolute truth. And
of course, they didn't like that because
somebody that was critiquing
he considered him, because then this person said, well, who is who is Poe?
Right. Who might be qualified to judge a consistency as perfect? But, you know, a consistency like 2.2 plus 2 is 4, or.
But we just found he has critics like this throughout his life, but especially on Eureka.
Yeah.
Because they were going after, you know, his basic belief in what the universe was all about. And he was going against what they were trying to sell back then. And so we likened it to today's experts. You have panels of experts on
COVID
on these news shows and stuff, and somebody puts on a white lab coat, and then you've got to listen to them because they know what they're talking about. So, you know, it's the same thing today, yesterday, tomorrow. Nothing new under the sun, like it says in the Bible as well.
Right.
It's been happening over and over. It's always happening. The same stuff we're going through now.
Right. Poe summarizes that we would ourselves have to be God to understand anything of his nature. He states that God created matter from his spirit. A lot of people, when you're researching this and they're writing their negative stories, try to say that Poe was an atheist. And I don't have the quote with me right now, but somebody confronted him about that. And he was like, heavens no. And I wish I had the quote for you.
Yeah. But when you read Eureka, he is seeing God everywhere. He is not an atheist.
Right. He says, Poe's idea that the normal condition of the universe can be achieved only in the unity of the primary particle. And the primary particle is the one, or the creator, the being, the supernatural being that who created us. Mm-hmm. He recognized that in a differentiated universe, gravity has its counterpart. Poe called it electricity. He says, through the original particle contained no differing particles, the cosmos, which has irradiated from that original unity, does depend upon the repulsive impulses of electricity. Gravity represents the force of attraction, and Poe asserted that attraction is the body and repulsion, the soul. The one is the material, the other is the spiritual principle of the universe. No other principles exist. Obeys the devil. His conception that the individual gradually attains oneness with the Godhead, that the self is Jehovah, flew in the face of the objectivism posed by Christianity of his day. And then I think that's all from there. One of my favorite quotes from the book is, the plots of God are perfect. The universe is a plot of God. Mm-hmm. And, you know, he's a writer, and he's known for his stories, and he uses plot. I like that. And then the very last sentence in the book is, in the meantime, bear in mind that all is life, life within life, the less within the greater, and all within the spirit divine. Another interesting thing that stands out to me is all throughout here, he talks and mentions the firmament. Mm-hmm. You know, if you've been watching my Simply Reading the Bible, we talk about when in the beginning God created the earth, and that it was a firmament, you know, waters above and waters below. And I won't get into that. It gets heavy on parts when he's discussing that, but it's, when I'm reading it, I'm knowing like there's something there profound here I'm not able to grasp, and I'm gonna keep reading.
Well, and there's obvious that there's something a lot bigger to Edgar Allan Poe than the Fall of the House of Usher.
Yeah.
And just being, you know, with mental decay and just dark things. He was seeing light, and he was seeing positivity. So me and Yvonne have the question, why was so much effort put into portraying Poe as this dark drunkard? And there's even stories where he had something to where he couldn't stand to drink alcohol. Yeah. So he would not have been drunk all the time.
Right. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. Let me read you one more sentence. In the beginning, we can admit, indeed we can comprehend, but one first cause, the truly ultimate principle, the volition of God. His will. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying he was a Christian, but he was definitely not an atheist after reading this book. highly, I don't know if you can recommend it. But when you go and you start researching it, when they're listing all of his works, can you go back? Oh, you need that to read. When you start listing and seeing all of his works, Eureka is not usually included in them.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that over half the things when you see stuff about the life of Poe, they don't even mention Eureka.
Yeah.
But he considered it his most important work. So we just wonder, we're asking a question. Why was there so much effort put into disappearing this work of his? Not disappearing it, but because you can still find it.
Right.
But it's definitely trying to be erased and not highlighted.
It was very important to him. It was so important that he thought that this book was going to, when he gave this lecture, he expected like 2,000 people. And normally he could draw a crowd and that wouldn't have been any problem. But for some reason, there were only 60 people at this one. He had hoped that he would be able to raise funds from this venture for his next venture in life, which was the stylist.
Yeah, and Poe should have been able to have people there, especially later in his career, because he was the first American popular writer to depend on his writings for his living.
Right.
He was the first back in he started in the 1830s, I guess it was.
Yeah.
When he first started publishing his own stuff. And supposedly that also contributed to him being a deadbeat and always in debt and stuff. And he was a gambler. That's another thing they always say. He was this big gambler and he always had debts. Yeah. And so I wonder just about Edgar Allan Poe, which is a pretty big deal, but he's been lied about. His story's been changed. But you look at the influences that he had on literature in America. And Ray Bradbury, the famous science fiction writer, credits him with a lot of his inspiration. It also goes to Alfred Hitchcock, credited Edgar Allan Poe. Mark Twain was inspired by Edgar Allan Poe. You know, Poe is also Edgar. The Edgars, the Mystery Writers Awards, are named after him. They're called the Edgars.
Right.
And I've always heard of the Edgars, but I never put that together.
It never hit me.
And he's also credited with starting the detective novel genre, because Arthur Conan Doyle basically said he based Sherlock Holmes directly on Detective Dupin from the Murders in the Rue Morgue. He's also credited with being basically the father of modern science fiction, with H.P. Lovecraft and H.G. Wells being inspired by him.
Cryptography.
So many. So he's got science fiction, mystery, detective novels, and horror. So it isn't just the macabre and the dark things, you know.
And he made the cryptography, popular.
And also, I was going to get into that as well. But, during his lifetime, while he was alive, he was mostly known as a literary critic, that he was a very sharp, knew what needed to be done with writing. He actually brings the short story to another level.
Right.
And so he wasn't even known as a fiction writer during his life. They saw him as this great recognized literary critic.
Right.
But like Yvonne said, there's a man named William Friedman who credited one of Poe's books for getting him into cryptology. And this guy, long story short, before World War II, he's the head of a department that ends up breaking the Japanese diplomatic codes before World War II or before Pearl Harbor. And then this guy also ends up in 1952 in basically the father of the cryptology division of the NSA. So then that brings us to today's times and a bunch of stuff about that. But I just thought that was interesting to throw in there. All these different folks that are inspired and went on to do other things because of Edgar Allan Poe. So that doesn't sound like a guy that has that much influence and effect on so many people.
He was just a drunken,
he was just some drunkard,
dark, depressing dude.
And even his death.
I thought he died. My idea is that he died of sadness
in a gutter
and depression, that he was,
But people think something was done to him. He was supposedly engaged.
Yeah.
The week that week he disappeared and was found.
Well, he was on the way to Philadelphia for an editing job.
Yeah, he was about to be married again to a sweetheart from long ago, because his first wife had already died of tuberculosis. And he was, finding new love or, old love again and headed for a new job. He was only 40 years old. And then all of a sudden he's found in a bad way. They don't know what's wrong with him. And then he dies.
Right.
And of course, all of his medical records and his death certificate have disappeared. There, you don't have any
I
paperwork.
find that interesting, especially since, what was it, his doctor, his attending physician dismissed reports that Poe had been drinking heavily before his death. So that attending physician would have signed the death warrant, which wouldn't say what they wanted it to say. But he said, he even wrote a book, Edgar Allan Poe. We might need to read that. It was his attending physician, a defense, both to refute these rumors and to provide his own firsthand account of Poe's final days. Regrettably, Moran's account, well, they say regrettably, Moran's accounts vary so widely, they are not generally considered reliable. But I'd like to read his book to see his defense.
And that brings us to the man who gave us I think the man who is singly the biggest one that gave us our image of what Poe is. His name is Griswold, kind of like Clark Griswold of Family Vacation fame. But this guy they actually collaborated about 10 years before on some publications of poems. But Edgar didn't, he critiqued his inclusion of certain authors in this anthology of poetry, because both of them at the time were trying to promote American poets and get us off to where, in American schools, you also studied American poets and not just English poets.
Right.
And they were kind of on the same page for a while, but he even published some of Poe's poems. Well, Poe did a little critique of his thing, and it was not totally negative, but it wasn't totally positive. And the guy took offense of it, and I guess he carried this grudge over into to Poe's death. And he actually wrote something called the Memoir of the Author. He made a memoir of Poe that hit, and he wrote his obituary that hit the day that Poe was buried. And so he wrote the story. He wrote what we would think of. He forged Poe's, Poe letters saying this was Poe to paint him as a deranged.
It was so libelous that he wouldn't sign his real name to it.
And of course, he
put a pseudonym.
Under a pseudonym, he wrote all this stuff.
He was a mad, drunken, womanizing opium addict who based his dark tales on personal experience.
Yeah. Well, this Griswold guy was other people would call him, he was very mean and ruthless in his dealings with other people. So it wasn't just Poe, but I think Poe was a bigger stature that he needed to bring down. So, and this guy's stuff got accepted. When people would do biographies of Poe, they would use Griswold as a sourcing for their, when they painted Poe a certain way. So it goes to this day that if people were writing about it, they would use this Griswold guy as a source.
Well, it says here that Griswold's distorted picture of Poe influenced popular opinion of the author for over a century. Yeah. Definitely, it's still influencing, because that's why we have the idea we have about him.
Yep.
And then, not to mention, how he died. That if you look at all the conspiracy theories,
and there's no settled way about what happened.
If you Google it, you'll see 19 thoughts on how he died. 13 reasons.
One of them's rabies.
Rabies.
It's like they threw everything on the wall and some of it would stick.
Rabies, drunk. Oh, and my favorite. Okay, so one of the things that I saw, and this is biography.com.
Yeah.
4 days before his death, Poe was found at a polling place on voting day, and this location was associated with something called cooping, COOPING. It's a form of voter fraud in which unsuspecting victims were drugged and forced to vote at one polling place after another until being left for dead. That sounds kind of hysterical. Yeah. But you hadn't heard that one, and you'd read a whole bunch of other.
Because I've seen where he was found in a bar. I've seen where he was found in a gutter. They can't even get the story of where he was found, because he was still not quite coherent, but he was talking. Right. But all the accounts do always use the word he was in distress. Right. So, and they didn't even know what was wrong with him, but then he died a few hours after they got him to the hospital.
He died like 4 days after like
4 days.
So he was found, and then his.
Well, and that's that one. There's different accounts all over the place of how he was.
I don't think it was ours. I think because he did. They took him to a hospital.
Mm-hmm. But he said some things. I can't remember what he said, but he said some things that they couldn't tell what he meant. He
didn't know where his luggage was.
He was supposedly he was also wearing someone else's clothes.
Now he did ask for the name of Reynolds.
He asked Reynolds, and they didn't know
who that was.
But I wonder how they knew he was wearing somebody else's clothes.
Yeah, how did they know that?
Yeah,
I think maybe reading that physician's defense.
That would be kind of cool to read.
Might have to do a follow up on this scope in the future. But some of his other. I was looking up some of his other works, like there's a descent into the maelstrom, and this goes also more for the people like to want to say that he was an atheist. That's another idea I had that he was. And before he gets into the body of a descent into the maelstrom, this is at the top before you start reading. The ways of God in nature, as in providence, are not as our ways, nor are the models that we frame any way commensurate to the vastness, profundity, and unsearchableness of his works, which have a depth in them greater than the well of Democritus. And the well of Democritus was in, I think,
infinite universe or something like that.
I believe, that the universe was infinite. But it was interesting that he said that the ways of God in nature, as in providence, are not our ways. God says
because he said earlier in the
our
other
thoughts
book,
are not his.
He says
thoughts.
In Eureka, we can't know God without being God. We can't fathom it.
That's another thing in the book is he disputes the notion of infinity, that there's just this unending galaxy. And he says that's when he calls out some of these scientists, because when they say that, they can't prove infinity.
Yeah.
You just kind of have to take it on faith. And he said no, that he doesn't believe in infinity, and gravity he believes as he describes totally differently than Newton.
Isaac Newton does.
Another interesting one is he did a poem called To Science, and I won't read that, but he thought that science could be somewhat malevolent. He describes it as being the daughter of old time. Science as an entity with power is able to influence the lives of beings just as time does. Time might control when one lives or dies, but science governs how one's days operate.
And think about what science governs how those days are operate, how you live those days.
Think about social distancing and masks and all the plastic they're putting up everywhere in schools and businesses.
And it's not going to prolong our days on this earth any longer, another hour or minute, but it's going to affect the quality of the life that we have here. Listening to these people, and I saw that when you read that, I was just thinking about also Eisenhower, Ike. Everybody always talks about his little speech in the Oval Office on the way out of his 2 terms.
Yeah,
when he warns of the the military-industrial complex.
Oh, the science.
What people forget is there was a science-technology partnership that was even more dangerous. He said in that same speech, he talked about scientists and technology being a worse authoritarian avenue that was coming for us. And I wonder what, that's another thing that people don't know from everybody knows about. He warned us about the military industrial complex.
Right.
He talked about the science technology complex.
Why don't we talk about that part of it? This says it's between 2 modes of discussion.
So it's kind of like synchronicity is all these things, some of the stuff that Poe talks about, where it's
kind of like we're all having like a Eureka moment
or an apocalyptic moment where we're getting a revelation of things constantly, and it just seems now we're getting more,
raising the anger level of the world. Well, the social distance. There's nothing social about distancing.
No,
it's very cruel and inhumane. I think you could even term it as torture, especially when you talk about with regard to our children and the elderly.
Or just at church and your pastor says, hey, give them an air high five. Don't touch them.
Right.
It's opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. Air fist bumps.
Air fist bump. And when he talks about how science it controls your behavior. It's almost more important than time.
Yeah.
But I just find it interesting. I can see why his thoughts on science and then his thoughts on, the divine being and a spiritual divinity wouldn't mix because remember he was in, that literary group is, higher society. And
that's another reason why some of these guys probably look down. Who is he to say what truth is going to be? He's just a fiction writer or whatever.
And a lot of people thought he was spoken vulgar terms. Aldous Huxley said that.
Yeah.
Actually, Aldous Huxley said that about Eureka.
That it was vulgar.
But he, Poe himself said that he used vulgar terms in language because
our language lacks the capacity to explain these things.
Yeah, the depth of some of this stuff.
Somebody else had said something along those lines of Aldous Huxley. I just couldn't remember which one it was.
Yeah. But it's interesting. All the Rudyard Kipling.
Yeah.
Said he owed, what did he say? My own personal debt to Poe is a heavy one.
Yeah.
I mean, Rudyard Kipling.
And Hitchcock said, I looked at him and his stories for every time I was writing something.
Right.
I wanted it to be like that. And Ray Bradbury himself says that as well, that he based a lot of his stories on stuff that Poe did. He tried to be as good as Poe was.
Well, when you read his stories, I mean, I remember reading The Telltale Heart when I was little, and I've never forgotten it.
The way he uses words to put you in that.
He's definitely got the storytelling down, which, that's what this book is all about is, telling the story of what the universe is. Imagine trying to tell that story and make it into something people could digest. I think that he was maybe before his time. I think there's a lot of truth to Eureka. I don't know about most of it because he talks about black holes and space, and I'm not altogether sure that we're being told straight about that. And there's no way you can.
But he was he questioned the status quo at the time about the narrative at the time about what they were seeing out up in the stars in the sky, and we have a right to do that. We have a right to ask questions.
Right. And that's probably why they smeared him. So just think about everything that we're going through now with COVID and the personalities now that they smear. And imagine we lose, the presidency, or actually we live in a time now where anybody, if you can get published or if you can get your writing out there, you can help, narrate what people might think in the future of what happened in the past. And all the lies that they tell now, it's the same thing. It's the same story.
Repeated over and over again.
I think that's all we've got.
Yeah, that was because and really we read a bunch of stuff, but that's a cursory investigation into Edgar Allan Poe.
Yeah.
There's so much more in there.
We'll have to get that book
deeper
and then maybe go deeper
of his
because
position.
Eureka is something you can read on your own, but it's not really
and you got to go back. I've gotten back to many passages and read over again. It takes a minute to digest. It takes a while.
Right.
But we're going to close with a song that's his poem Annabelle Lee set to music. And I meant to say in the beginning, we played a song a couple of minutes long. It's supposedly his
favorite song.
His favorite song.
What was the name of that song?
That one was Come Rest in This Bosom.
Yeah.
Piano. It was really pretty. But we're going to close with this guy, Annabelle Lee.
And then we'll
appreciate you guys, and we'll
next time.
Might see in a few weeks if timing works out and get right back on track with the Ides.
December 13th.
Yep. Let's see.
You've never heard of Eureka, Leonard?
It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden that lived whom you may know by the name of Annabelle. And this maiden she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me.
Wait.
Wonderful internet connection.
Yeah.
I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love. I and my Annabelle, with the love of the winged seraphs of heaven, coveted her and me.
I know, Leonard. We've never heard of it either.
And long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabelle. So now I, my kinsman came and bore away from me, to shut her up in a sepulchre in this kingdom by the sea. Was not half so happy and heaven went and being here on me. Yes, so that was the reason us all but know in this kingdom by the sea. And the wind came out of a cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabelle. But her love it was strong.
Why does it keep doing that?
It's probably because of my wife.
Stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we, of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabelle. Never beams or the bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabelle. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabelle. And so on the noontide I look down by the side of my darling, my life and my pride, in a sepulchre there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea.
And there we go. Thanks, guys.
See you next time.